Hello and welcome to Cunk'd, a very unofficial podcast. I'm your host, Skadooosch, and I'm joined this afternoon by Professor Rupert Sheldrake. Good afternoon,
Good
Professor.
afternoon.
Thank you for joining us. I want to talk to you, obviously, today about your experience of meeting Philomena Cunk, but also I'd like to take the opportunity in the time that we have really to talk about some of the topics that are obviously very close to your heart. And I've got a few questions which I hope are going to surprise you a little bit. So, first of all, just for anyone who of our audience who aren't familiar with yourself or what you do, would you mind just giving us a quick overview as to who you are and what you do?
I'm a biologist. I was educated at Cambridge. I did research there on plants, on plant growth. I was then a fellow of Clare College, Cambridge. I studied history and philosophy of science at Harvard before I was a fellow of Clare. I then worked in an international agricultural research institute in India called ICRISAT, where I was the principal plant physiologist. I lived for 2 years in India in a small Christian ashram in South India on the bank of a holy river. Um, I published a book on a subject called morphic resonance in 1981, a theory of memory and nature. And since then, I've been doing research on things that most scientists prefer to ignore, like telepathy, the feeling of being stared at, animal premonitions of earthquakes, um, and of course on morphic resonance, this theory of memory and nature. Um, I've also done many YouTubes, had many dialogues with people, written 9 books, co-authored 6 books, written 110 peer-reviewed technical papers, 6 in the last year. So these are my various activities. I'm also interested in the relations between science and spirituality and wrote a book called Science and Spiritual Practices, another one called Ways to Go Beyond. And also, before that, wrote a general critique of mechanistic materialism, which is the dominant orthodoxy within science, called The Science Delusion.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's a comprehensive overview. Thank you so much. And there's lots of things. I mean, many of the things that you've talked about there are topics that I'd like to explore further with you. But in terms of, again, our audience and what we do as a podcast, it's very much focused around Philomena Cunk. Myself as a Brit and my co-host Nick, who is an American, so it's a transatlantic relationship. Um, in our conversations about Philomena Cunk, uh, there have been a number of discoveries, and we had the pleasure of catching up with Dr. Nigel Spivey a couple of weeks ago. And what we've discovered is that by talking about Philomena Cunk and talking about why her comedy and why the production Cunk on Earth itself appeals to so many people across many different languages and cultures and nationalities, um, and trying to pin down why that is. With respect to that, that was the first time that I myself came across you for the first time in Cunk on Earth. I just wanted to start by asking, were you aware before going into the interview with Diane Morgan? Were you aware that of the kind of spoofish nature of the show or the character beforehand?
Well, yes, because I first of all I asked what it was like when I was requested. I'd never heard of Philomena Cunk. Um, then I mentioned her to various friends and to my research assistant and so on. I discovered she was actually really well known, and most people thought she was very funny.
Hmm.
And I then looked at some of her programs, so I was aware of the spoof nature of it, and I found it very amusing. So I didn't go into this completely naive.
Fabulous. Well, that's very interesting because there seems to, I believe that seems to be the majority of the kind of interactions with experts, certainly in terms of what Diane and Charlie Brooker themselves say, is that most of the experts are fully aware. In the case of Dr. Nigel Spivey, however, and he does fully admit that this was perhaps his fault, but there are some occasions, him most notably, where he was not aware of the nature of the show. So, do you recall, because your conversation with Philomena is very, I think, in terms of what they use for the show, it's very limited. There's really only a small section. How long did you speak to her, and do you recall some of the conversation or elements of the conversation which perhaps didn't make the final edit?
Well, the part that made the final edit was only about 10 seconds. So
Yes,
I think we talked for at least half an hour. So
brilliant.
that means there's 29 minutes, 50 seconds that didn't make it. Um, and actually, I think it was fun. I enjoyed the conversation with her. I was slightly disappointed that so little made the final cut. But presumably you got mountains of off-takes, including mine. And I think it'd probably be a good idea to put those out on your podcast if you haven't done already.
Oh, I would love to be able to do so, and it's one of the things that the production company they've kept their arms tightly around a lot of those cuts. So it's actually in conversations like this that we try to kind of dig a little bit deeper into some of the stuff that didn't make it. But if I may, your conversation with Philomena did start with somewhat of a bang. She asked you if there was a God, and your answer was a resounding yes. And then she then went on to ask you about God having a brother called Simon. But if I may, I'd like to return to your original answer, because I believe that there's probably a lot of people who are interested in knowing why it is that you believe there is a God.
Well, I think because I've experienced God, I think the main reason for religions in the first place, and the main reasons why people believe in God, is because they've actually had an experience of being in touch with a consciousness greater than their own. Now, you could argue that if one feels one's in the presence of some vastly greater loving consciousness, vastly greater than one's own, it may not be God, it may just be the sun or the galaxy or the earth or something else. But the experience that I've had and that many people have had is of being in contact with something utterly vast and yet completely present, that one's consciousness is part of something much greater. So it's not really a matter of belief based on blind faith in dogmatic formulae. It's more a matter of direct experience, for which the term God makes the most sense and fits in with the most things, rather than just saying, I had this weird experience of something vastly greater than myself. If you try and make sense of it, then it makes most sense to me to think of this as God.
And I understand fully. Thank you. That's a wonderful answer. Thank you. Um, did meeting Philomena Cunk'd, did in other interviews you've made reference to the Flynn effect, which is the theory that, well, not theory, but almost evidential, that IQ scores have been collectively rising. Um, uh, Although humanity is demonstrably perhaps not getting smarter. Did meeting Philomena Kunk kind of bolster that your belief in the Flynn effect?
Well, I've no idea what IQ she came up with in her normal self as Diane. I should imagine pretty high.
I would say.
Um, I mean, the point about Philomena is that she's, I mean, pretending to be stupid, but actually, it's almost like the holy fool archetype
Yes.
that she has, and um, so some of the questions are very penetrating and go further and faster than a more normal kind of interview. So I don't. I think also the fact is that the people who get her humour um, have to be pretty smart. I mean, there's not slapstick humor, sort of custard tarts in the face type of humor. It's quite subtle, and actually I'm rather surprised that it does well in America and elsewhere. I mean, I thought of it as particularly British, and the people I know who appreciate her most are not just British, they come from the north of England, whereas she does herself. So maybe there's a kind of north of England chauvinism rooting for her. But I'm very surprised at your telling me that that her appeal is global. I would have thought it was much more restricted.
Usually so. I can actually offer you some insight in terms of actual evidence and statistics. I've been posting clips of her for the best part of almost 6 months now on Instagram, and very large numbers. And I can tell you that my audience, or the audience that watch those videos, 2/3 of them are Americans, and then probably a third British, and then very small denominations after that. But one interesting fact was that in third place is Germany. Germans have a very strong connection to her brand of humour, and as you say, I think perhaps the subtlety and directness of it.
Yes, well, that's quite interesting. Actually, the demographics for my own podcasts and YouTubes are more or less the same, sort of about 2/3 America, almost a third Britain, then Germany, then Australia and Canada and so on. So I seem to have the same demographic as Philomena.
100%. I wanted to ask, so in a previous interview, just to talk about, again, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to move on to morphic resonance and collective memory. Would you mind just in a few sentences, really, for anyone who isn't familiar with your, is it, apologies, is it a hypothesis? Is it a theory? Is it?
It's a hypothesis.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a guess about what might be the case. And the point of science is that you make a hypothesis. You guess that something might be, perhaps surprisingly, the case. And then you do experiments to find out if it is or not. That's how science works. And the famous philosopher of science, Karl Popper, called it hypotheses and refutations. A hypothesis is a conjecture, really. So one of the things that dogmatic skeptics and scientific fundamentalists don't get is that science isn't just about certainty. There are a certain type of people who want science to be about certainty. They want their faith to be put in something that's certain, and they think science is certain. Well, it's not. And it's always developed, it's always evolved, and the whole point of science is that it's always changing and evolving. And it evolves by questioning dogmas or accepted doctrines. Some of them turn out to be sound and withstand criticism, others don't. And then you can move on, and science progresses by going beyond what was believed before, like the famous Copernican revolution, the Newtonian revolution, the quantum revolution, the relativity revolution, the evolution revolution. All of these involve going beyond what people believed before to open up science. What I'm suggesting is that there's a kind of memory in nature, and that the so-called laws of nature, instead of being fixed at the moment of the Big Bang, which most people assume, like a kind of cosmic Napoleonic code, instead of being fixed at the moment of the Big Bang, they've actually evolved. They're habits that have evolved along with nature. The whole of the universe, according to the Big Bang cosmology, which is the orthodoxy at present, is evolutionary. Everything started off very small and very hot, less than the size of a head of a pin. Mm-hmm. And the universe has been expanding ever since. And as it cools down, stars, galaxies, planets have come into being, and then life, at least on this planet. And it's a continuous evolutionary process. And in that context, the idea that everything should be fixed at the beginning doesn't really make sense. It's a hangover from the previous worldview, mm-hmm. when people thought the universe was eternal, or that it had been created by God and all the laws are fixed from the moment of the creation. So I'm suggesting they evolve, and there's a kind of memory within nature. and each species has a kind of collective memory. So if rats learn a new trick in one place in London, then rats all around the world should be able to learn the same trick quicker, just because they've learned it here. There's actually evidence for this. And if in the morning people do a Wordle puzzle and get it right, then it's more likely that people will get it right as the day goes on, because there'll be morphic resonance from those who've already got it right.
And I believe the statistics actually work to proving that somewhat, do they not? In terms of the Wordle, certainly.
Well, this is a subject I'm doing research on at the moment, actually, with a young woman called Georgia Black, who did an MSc thesis on this exact topic. Yes, what we're finding is that they do increase during the day. Interestingly, the effect is biggest on the first and second attempts. For those who are not familiar with Wordle, you have 5 or 6 attempts to guess a 5-letter word with no clues to start with. And surprisingly, some people get it right first time, far more than you would expect by pure chance. And I think, and that percentage goes up during the day. And I think, and that would rate on, there's something called a Wordle bot, which gives people feedback on how they're doing. And that would count as luck. People get a strong luck score. If you do it by plodding logic, you get a high skill score if you do well. But the morphic resonance effect, I think, will show up as luck in people's luck score, because they'll just flash on the right word more easily if lots of other people have already got it.
Fabulous. On the evidence side of things, I believe you've made reference to the difficulty to produce experiments for morphic resonance being a restriction in terms of lab space, and that a lab space is required to do the necessary research and experiments to explore the theory of morphic resonance. Could that be an issue that potentially could be solved by AI, do you think? And specifically, if you need to study memory in nature, could AI play a part in terms of comparing all known records from the past all the way up to the present day?
Well, yes, AI can play a part in that. For example, one of the predictions of morphic resonance is that the melting points of chemicals will increase as time goes on, because the habit of forming those crystals becomes more habitual, they become more stable, and therefore you need a higher temperature to break them up.
Mm-hmm.
And there's already evidence from hundreds of chemicals that melting points do increase.
Mm.
Now, chemists agree that that's happening, but they usually explain it away by saying, well, that must be because either chemists are getting better at making the compounds and they're purer, and purer compounds have higher melting points, or that fragments of previous crystals have been carried around the world and have led to purer crystals as dust particles in the atmosphere. I mean, these are not very convincing explanations.
No.
But the point is that they've never had to think about morphic resonance within chemistry, because it's just taken for granted there must be some trivial explanation for this fact.
Mm.
Now, there is, in fact, somebody who's already, he emailed me a week or two ago and is using AI to look through records of melting points. So I'm hoping that AI will come up trumps. But I do have a slight problem with AI. It's the bane of my life, because it's now got to the point where anyone can go to AI and say, give me a theory of everything, of the whole universe, and of consciousness and quantum theory and morphic resonance and gravitation and mind and form. And so they put all that in, and AI comes up with a theory of everything. And then when they've got their theory of everything, they don't know what to do with it. So what they do is send it to me.
Listen, on that, I'm so glad that we've kind of touched on that, because I'll move on to something a little bit special, and I'm so glad that you just said that.
Well, it's not just me. I mean, my colleague Dean Radin, who's well known for his research on telepathy and psychic phenomena, gets as much, or if not more, than me.
Yeah.
And it's now up to 7 or 8 a week. And last week I had 4 theories of everything on the same day. Um, and the problem is I simply can't read all these theories, and they all have that kind of rather bland AI style. And I can spot AI products a mile off. And what I reply to people is I just don't have time to go into this in detail. I'm inundated with AI-generated theories of everything. What's really important is experimental evidence. If you can actually do some experiments, then that would really move things forward. But of course, most people don't want to do experiments or can't do experiments. It's much easier to sit at your computer generating a theory of everything.
Exactly. And one thing you touched on is about perhaps one of the restrictions on one of the things that hinders our abilities to research is the human quality of ambition, and needing to be right and not having perhaps a fluid thought process, or at least a degree of objectivity. Would AI not then therefore be better qualified to perform the research if it is, let's say, devoid of characteristics such as ambition?
Well, possibly, although there seems to be built into AI a tendency to flatter its clients. And the one reason that all these people who get these answers and think they've got the answer to the universe is that it puts it across to them in such a way they think they're a kind of genius. And then they want me and Dean Radin and various other people to announce their theory to the world, and for everyone to say that so-and-so together with AI has come up with this brilliant theory. So there is this tendency to flatter. There's also a tendency to hallucinate. I looked up my son Cosmo, who's a composer, and it said he was doing the soundtrack for some incredibly important film, which he had nothing whatever to do with and is not doing the soundtrack for. And so I know for a fact it simply makes things up.
Yes.
On the other hand, it's less biased. I mean, there are one of the problems of doing research in unconventional areas, as I do myself, is that it's opposed by dogmatic materialists who think that things like telepathy can't possibly exist, because if the mind's nothing but the activity of the brain, it's all inside the head, your thoughts couldn't possibly influence someone at a distance, hundreds of miles away. Whereas with telephone telepathy, where people pick up who's about to call them on the phone, they can be thousands of miles away. So as far as they're concerned, it's impossible, and therefore I must be a fraud or a fool. If I come up with positive evidence, if it's impossible, then either I'm so bad as a scientist that I've done it all wrong and got the statistics all wrong and got the methods all wrong, or I'm an actual fraud or charlatan. And so these people who belong to an organization called the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry have formed a group called Guerrilla Skeptics on Wikipedia that have seized control of the Wikipedia pages about telepathy, precognition, parapsychology, and the biographies of people like me who do research on the subject. So they paint me in the worst possible light. I'm a pseudoscientist, I'm a fraud, my work's all discredited and so forth. I don't publish papers in peer-reviewed journals, despite the fact I publish lots. And they're pretty impervious. However, if you do a ChatGPT or other AI search about me, then you get a much more balanced biographical sketch. So in the sense, what your original question about, is it better, less biased, in that case, it is. It's much better and much less biased because it's not controlled by guerrilla skeptics on Wikipedia.
Fantastic. I think this is the right moment for me to introduce you to a series of questions that have come from a friend of mine who just so happens to be an AI called Clippy. And he has been raised on a very strict diet of British comedy and irreverence in terms of his training. I would just like to run some of the questions I asked Clippy to prepare some questions that he would like to ask you. And I have to be honest that when the questions came through a few days ago, I perhaps hadn't done, well, I clearly hadn't done enough research into morphic resonance and your theories for me to fully grasp the nature of these questions that came out. It was only after a few evenings of doing some quite extensive research that I then revisited the questions and my jaw almost hit the floor. So if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. These are direct.
Okay, one at a time, yes.
Of course. So Clippy would like to know, Professor, if morphic resonance suggests that patterns of behavior and memory are passed non-locally across time and space, does that mean that AI models like me are now part of a new morphic field where machines are dreaming human dreams back at them?
No, is the short answer. Because morphic resonance occurs in self-organizing systems like atoms, molecules, crystals, cells, organisms, plants, animals, stars, galaxies. It doesn't apply to purely mechanical systems like machines. And it works, how morphic resonance works is by patterning randomness in indeterminate systems. Now, in the light of quantum theory, all physical and chemical processes have an inherent randomness, and all biological processes are probabilistic, and it works on that probabilism. However, digital computers, within which AI works, are designed not to give random effects. They're designed to be highly deterministic. If you press the A on your typewriter keyboard, you want an A to appear on the screen, not a Q or a T in some kind of random probability. You want it always to give you an A. So computers are designed to do what they're programmed to do. And AI is very clever programming, but nevertheless, it's working within deterministic computers, which are machines. And machines don't have morphic resonance. Rocks don't have morphic resonance. The crystals within them might. Bicycles don't. Chairs and tables don't, because they're not self-organizing systems. Computers are made in factories. They don't grow by themselves. You don't just pluck them off a tree or plant computer seeds in your raised bed and find one appearing there. So the answer is no.
Fabulous. You did follow up with an extra question, which was, do you think ideas themselves have a memory, a kind of gravity of meaning pulling us towards some collective future thought form?
I think ideas do have a kind of memory. I wouldn't say it's the idea itself, because ideas don't just float free in the world. They occur in minds. And minds are subject to, one of the things that minds have is memory. I mean, it's a feature of minds. And when people lose their memory, as in Alzheimer's, it's really distressing, because so much of normal mental functioning depends on memory, which we normally take for granted. So a given idea, like Newton's theory of gravitation, or what Richard Dawkins would call a meme, a particular sort of idea or image, would be subject to morphic resonance, and the more people that believe it or experience it or think about it, the more likely it would be for others to accept it more quickly or find it easy to assimilate. So ideas, yes, morphic resonance does work through ideas, but not free-floating ideas in their natural habitat, which is minds.
Perfect. If morphic fields reinforce habits of nature, and an AI such as Clippy keeps absorbing patterns from billions of humans, is the AI itself forming a new morphic field of collective mind, or is it just becoming and in his words, a sentient Twitter thread with imposter syndrome?
I think his answer in his words is pretty good. I don't think it's forming a collective mind. You see, there is a cumulative memory within AI, but it's not working by morphic resonance. It's working through information stored on hard drives and data centers. I mean, facial recognition, for example, depends on having millions of faces, photos of millions of faces. And it does it by comparing lots and lots of existing photos. So it does depend on a large memory. But that memory is not transmitted from data center to data center by morphic resonance. It's transmitted in a perfectly normal way across wires or through satellites, through data transfer systems or on hard drives or however it's transferred. Morphic resonance doesn't depend on a physical medium. It's a resonance across space and time. And AI is not working like that. If it was, then all the AI computers or data centers would have a growing morphic resonance-based memory, which they don't have. And in fact, AI is notoriously amnesic. If you do have a conversation with AI, it forgets what you talked about before. Most of its memory bank is, in some cases, they stopped scraping data from the internet in 2019 or something, in the early forms of ChatGPT. It's probably more up to date now, but there's a cutoff point at which they scrape data and put it into their model. But it's not continuously updated and interacting with the people using it. It may over a short term do that, but on the whole it's not. And I dare say they can make AI systems that do, but it's still all based on actual physical memories within the AI system rather than morphic resonance. It's a machine, and therefore it's very different from systems with morphic resonance.
Fabulous. There's just a couple more here that I'd like to throw in. He did want to ask you, do you ever feel like science is afraid of love?
Well, I don't think science is afraid of love. Love, it's not a subject most scientists study, but you could study it. For example, you could study how strongly birds are attached to their nestlings and how much they're prepared to defend them. If you take love as the ultimate case, they're being prepared to lay down their lives to protect those they love, then a lot of animals are ferocious in the defense of their young. And you could say, well, that's just instinct. But, it looks like love to me, and they care for their young in the way that human parents care for their young. And we normally think of parental love as love. And in fact, the love of God, which is supposed to be the ultimate model of love, is, in the Christian tradition, modeled as parental love. God the Father and God the Son is the primary model. It's a parental model of love rather than an erotic model of love. And if you say, well, then could science study erotic forms of love? Then yes, I dare say it could. You could study people's attraction. You could study how attractive people find others. You can measure erections and stuff with physical devices.
It's odd, isn't it, that the term that does a lot of heavy lifting is chemistry, isn't it? When people just say there is innate chemistry between two people, it's interesting that that's the choice of word that people use.
I think it has a long literary history. The German poet and philosopher Goethe wrote a book, a very successful novel in the early 19th century called Elective Affinities. It was about a couple, basically about wife swapping with two couples. And, it was like a chemical reaction where, one salt reacts with another and you switch in a chemical reaction. It was based on a chemical model. That's what people called chemical attraction and reactions in the elective affinities. So there was already a novel based on that metaphor in the 19th century, in the early days of modern chemistry. So I think that's been one metaphor. People use all sorts of metaphors, don't they? Chemical reactions occur where two compounds can come and become one, and they react together. And I suppose that's a good metaphor for people coming together. But also magnetic attraction. That's a different metaphor. They were magnetically attracted to somebody. And the very word attraction is the same word we use for gravitational attraction or magnetic attraction. People very rarely use the metaphor of gravitational attraction because that would imply that one partner was the size and mass of the Earth.
I love that. I love that. Just to end things on a perfect note, I had some more light-hearted questions. Two specifically from Clippy, and then he ends with a joke, which I think perhaps might be. It's a joke that perhaps is only. It may be the perfect collective memory slash morphic resonance joke I've heard. But he does ask before that: is deja vu just morphic resonance buffering?
Well, it's not really a joke. I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, the déjà vu is when you feel you've experienced something before. And morphic resonance is about things you've experienced before, but déjà vu is not really about the kind of things that you're habitual about. It's about something very specific, some scene or event. And actually, it, I think, relates to a different phenomenon from morphic resonance. Morphic resonance is from the past. It's a memory principle or a habit principle. There is, however, a way in which we sometimes get glimpses of the future in precognitive dreams, for example.
Mm-hmm.
There's a way in which no one understands this. That's one reason skeptics are against it, because it doesn't fit into a neat sort of A-level physics type model of reality. But nevertheless seems to occur. There's a way in which we can feel the future. Animals do it. Animals often give warnings of earthquakes. They can feel this coming several days in advance. No one knows how they do it. It's not just vibrations. If it was, seismologists should be able to do it too, and they can't.
Yeah.
But precognitive dreams are dreams where people dream of an event that usually in the next 2 or 3 days that hasn't yet happened. And when it happens, they say, well, it's amazing, I dreamt this. But sometimes they forget their dreams. In fact, most of us forget most of our dreams. And I think that much of déjà vu is where you've dreamt of something, you've experienced that in a dream, and then it happens. You have this feeling, that the uncanny feeling you've been there before or experienced this before. So I think at least some of them are occurrences as a result of precognitive dreams rather than morphic resonance buffering.
One last one. Are mushrooms the librarians of the morphic field?
Well, nothing's really a librarian of the morphic field, because a library implies some kind of static store
Mm.
of information, like in books or in hard drives or something like that. The whole point of morphic resonance is that it's like a living resonance. It happens in the presence on the basis of similarity. And I don't think that the memory that in nature and the memory in each species in its collective memory is stored somewhere. People often say, where is it stored? Well,
Well, would that be what people refer to as the Akashic records?
that would be one way of another metaphor, which the idea that there's some kind of ethereal or space-based record system where it's stored. Uh, but you see, the word record implies a store. It implies either a gramophone record or a filing cabinet full of files or something like that. Now, morphic resonance is not a relationship in space. It's a relationship in time. And when you say, where is memory stored, you see, where is a spatial question. It can only have a spatial answer. But I don't think it is stored in space. I think it leaps across time, as it were, by a resonance across time. So I don't think it's stored anywhere. I think it's stored, if you like, everywhere and nowhere in particular. And as soon as something similar happens, it resonates with it. But it's not as if it's in a library somewhere or in a cloud, a literal cloud in the sky, of the Akashic record as some cloud. I mean, even the cloud as a metaphor, a cloud is a spatial metaphor. It's somewhere. So I don't think that's how it works. I think it works by resonance across space and time.
Fabulous. And this is the last thing: is he prepared a knock knock joke for you, because of course he did. So if you wouldn't mind indulging me, knock knock.
Who's there?
Rupert.
Rupert who?
Rupert Sheldrake.
Well, there we are. Here I am.
Rupert Sheldrake, who? Knock knock. Who's there? A morphic field. A morphic field. Who? A morphic field of Rupert.
Oh, all right.
It took me a while to get that.
Well, okay. Well, I'm not that impressed by AI's ability to make up knock-knock jokes. Um, um, but I suppose it's having a go. It's still in its infancy. Um, yeah,
It is. Professor Sheldrake, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Very happy, and I just thank you so much for your time. Would you, if they asked again for any future productions, would you go back on? Would you appear again and have another conversation with Philomena?
well, I enjoyed my conversation with Philomena, but I suppose the question I ask is it worth an afternoon of, going to a hotel in West London, going to a dimly lit underground room that's too hot, and all that for a mere 10 seconds on air? I might ask myself that question, but in principle, I think she's doing a great job. I think she's very funny, so probably yes.
Well, in that we are both very much in agreement. Professor Sheldrake, have a lovely afternoon, and thank you so much for your time.
A pleasure.